Schedule shower, Captain.
Ready, set, go. Hello, guys.
Hi.
Welcome to the NC Raw podcast. I see a couple familiar faces sitting up in the front row.
Hey.
Matt Ball, Oryx Cohen, how you doing?
Good. Yeah, excellent. And before we get started, I just wanted to say if my family ends up watching this, hello, I miss you guys. Wish you were here.
Awesome. I'm surprised you didn't bring them with you, man.
Not this time, but PJ brought his family, which is really cool. Yeah.
I'm sure they'll be calling at the most inopportune time.
Hey, Matt, go ahead and give me some introductions. You got a nice group with you today, so let me know who's with you.
Yeah, this is great. So this is PJ Moynihan, producer and owner of Digitalized Media, producer of Healing Voices and upcoming Recovery Addiction.
Thank you.
Stephanie Mitchell, co-director with me at Humane Clinic, and a lovely, wonderful friend and person and therapist. And this is Ben. Karen, who I don't even know Ben before 2 days ago, but what I do know is this is a beautiful guy who is just giving so much to us to make Reawaken everything it is. So Ben's over from
Massachusetts. New York City.
New York City. PJ, where are you from?
I'm from Massachusetts.
Mass. Okay, cool. So you guys are all gathered together for Reawaken Australia. And we talked about it in depth when Matt was on the podcast a couple months back, and maybe we could just get a reset on what has taken place over the last couple days. What are some of your goals? What did you guys hope to achieve? What type of audience are you serving?
Yeah, well, look, I'm happy to start now. I think it's probably just useful to recap on 8 months ago. Stephanie and I were online with PJ and Oryx, and there was a suggestion they could build on the Healing Voices kind of community that we've built over here using the film, and maybe they could come to Australia. And me and Stephanie, in our foolhardy ways, went, yeah, let's do that. So what we found ourselves doing was underwriting this $50,000 bill and stumbling towards this, but then everyone's arrived, and we've just created a space of people spending time in connection. We've got some amazing speakers, not many speakers. We've really kept it narrow, so there's lots of time for reflection and connection. We've got some projects. We're going to produce 2 ebooks out of it. We're defacing or renaming the DSM. Rewriting. Yeah, which is a real joy. And there's just a good community building. I wonder what anyone else thinks we've got to so far.
Yeah, I just wanted to say it's also a beautiful place we're at. We're at a sanctuary here with some beautiful gardens, and the grounds are amazing. Some good food too. Someone said the other day that we're being nurtured with food and connection. We purposely kept the numbers pretty small. We capped it at 110 because this is about connection. It says on our shirts, connection, compassion, meaningful action. But I really think the core is that connected piece. And we've been at it for about a day and a half, and we're seeing that happen. It's a beautiful thing. People are connecting one-on-one. They're connecting in groups. Someone said, I think yesterday, that it's kind of a shocking feeling, like they feel safe here, and they don't normally feel safe in the world, which is a beautiful thing. And so yes, there are already meaningful actions happening here, and meaningful actions that will come out from this. We're actually doing a rally on Friday where we're going to be out in front of the Parliament building, right? Yeah. So we're wanting some change in society, but we're really thinking that change starts here, and it's happening. People are doing it and connecting, and we're all doing this together. So I just woke up this morning feeling happy. I was like, I feel glad to be here. This is a beautiful thing.
I wanted to ask you, Oryx, what are some of the similarities in the things that you've experienced over the last couple of days in Australia compared to the work that you're doing back home in Boston?
I think it's the same work.
Yeah.
Basically, that we and I think it's inspiring because for example, our core training that we do at the National Empowerment Center is emotional CPR, which is basically all about human connection again. And how you can bring a group of strangers together for 2 days through that training and create this type of atmosphere, this type of community where people feel safe, people feel connected to others. So I think it's consistent through all the work that we do in the States. And I think the challenge is then bringing that out to the mainstream, the broader community, because I think that people are really craving this. Like, people are feeling isolated, people are feeling alone, and disconnected from their neighbors, just disconnected from almost everything. And so I mean, this is honestly has probably been like the most intentional experience that I've had in terms of doing this for like we're here for a full week. And I think that adds a depth to what we're doing. But yeah, it's definitely consistent with what we do or kind of do back home.
I think just knowing Matt from the last podcast, he tends to just like that's a natural skill that he has. He tends to like bring that out of people. I talked to him for about an hour a few months back and felt like I've known him for my whole life. I really do. Tell me about that rewriting the DSM, because that's something that really interests me. I'm actually taking a class right now at the community college called Intake and Assessment, and the entire class is nothing but case studies, case study after case study, role play, and I find myself often frustrated. Very similar belief systems to some of the work that Matt does. So can you tell me what that's all about and why you're doing it and what the work entails and what's it going to look like?
Yeah, I'll speak to that. So we have this group of volunteers that have come along with us on this journey around Re-awaken, and one of the volunteers named Jane, she really wanted to, you'd seen a project similar where people had taken pages from the DSM and they had used sort of like various art journaling techniques to transform the page from being about pathology to being about the person. And so what we were hoping to do is that each person can choose a page, and it can be something they've been diagnosed with, it can be something that they object to, something that resonates with them, whatever that meaning they want to make from it. They ripped that out of the DSM, so we went and bought a couple of DSMs, amazingly.
Which was a horrible thing to do.
It was a very strange thing to do.
You can't get your tax back on it. It's an illegal product. Oh, that's not so.
We actually had, I flicked out an email to the team when we bought them, and PJ and Oryx are part of that, and I sort of said, I've ordered the DSMs, they're on their way, and PJ's like, okay, now I'm confused.
It's a different type of conference.
Yeah.
Now we're reading from the DSM.
So what we're doing is we're just seeing these beautiful pieces of meaning coming out of this experience. And I want to tell you just a couple of things that have been really amazing and terrible. We had this lovely experience of gathering together prior to the conference to kind of have a bit of a play with doing this. And so we sat down, a bunch of us volunteers, and got the DSMs out, and we started flicking through what pages might we want to transform. And I've never read a DSM before, and it was very disturbing and like shocking. It was very confronting, and I suppose I've heard about it, and I know I've read some of the diagnostic criteria, things like borderline online, but to actually flick through the DSM itself and see things like major depressive disorder. If you have an episode of feeling down for more than 2 weeks, you can get that diagnosis. Like crazy stuff, very disturbing. Anyway, so then what we did was we sat together and we had created this sort of playful space that I think arose out of the pain we were actually experiencing. Playful space of mocking, but also kind of talking about the difficulties, sharing our own experience of being labelled and what that had been like. So it was actually a very deep process. It wasn't simply a process of putting some art on this page. And so I know the page that I did, I've done a couple now, and one of them I specifically took words out of the text and highlighted only the words that seemed important, that were actually transformative. So kind of really picking out, I chose ADHD, which I don't have, but I kind of think is a completely ridiculous diagnosis. And I kind of highlighted, you know, like things like curious and attention and dreaming and, you know, all the lovely words around it, and just left out all the nasty kind of pathologizing labels because it seems so important to highlight the giftedness in that experience. And other people have done other things. Do you want to say what you did? That was so awesome.
Well, I did narcissistic personality disorder, which has always been this kind of horrible shame in my life that someone gave me that label. And, you know, kudos to the therapist who wrote to the psychiatrist to give this label, because at the end of therapy, she actually said I was wrong. But nonetheless, it's kind of stuck with me as this, you know, I don't know what it's like in America, but over here, if you have a label of narcissistic personality disorder, people don't like you. You know, you know, it's kind of this irony that actually you're probably craving love and connection, and people tell you you're antisocial and mean and vile. And as I was defacing mine, it reminded me of when my dad left home, and the song "I Want to Know What Love Is" by Foreigner was in the charts. And you know, that really, you know, and I'm looking at this label of a person that's craving adoration and attention and being valued, and I'm thinking, yeah, you know, what does it feel like when your dad sits down and tells you and your brothers and sisters that he's leaving home? Well, I don't think you know much what love feels like in that moment, you know. So it was painful. It was fun as well, but it was really, you know, really confronting. And yesterday to see a dozen people sat around the table ripping out a page and rewriting their narrative was just inspiring.
Yeah.
You know, it's hopeful.
And so we have this dream, and I really hope it becomes a reality because I don't have the time to put into it. So I'm hoping someone will take it up. But we have this dream that once everyone gathers their pages, we're going to make an ebook, which is great. But the bigger dream is we're going to actually try and make this a big national art exhibition that goes around to the major art galleries, and that we really try and talk about in the mainstream. I just have this real thing that we have to have these conversations outside our little cloistered collectives of people understanding this, and really go to spaces where people aren't thinking about this, in order to kind of talk about, you know, can we start to think about it differently? It's not really about labels, it's about people's experiences. And, so I don't know how that'll all come together, and I'm happy to be a part of it, but that's kind of part of the dream of this beginning here to be something bigger. Yeah.
Beautiful, man. I love the fact that you plan to take that out and to do more with it and to kind of like expand upon that, because I think that a big part of like why I do what I do is that there's so many unique individuals like you guys, and like the work that I'm doing here, like the work that Orcs and PJ do up in Boston, and that how do we connect the dots, and how do we bring each other together to kind of like share that message out and to get it out into the mainstream. And so like to carry on that project in such a beautiful way, it's going to be powerful. PJ, I want you to tell me the funniest thing that has happened this week with these guys. What has been the most hilarious part of the week so far?
There's a lot to choose from.
There's a lot to choose from. I mean, I don't know if I can necessarily like pull out an anecdote that quickly, but I think that what we're experiencing is just like a real sense of community with one another. Mm-hmm. You know, like we're all sharing this. To paint a picture for you, you know, we're all sharing this little apartment downstairs at this monastery. So it's like myself and my wife, my two young kids are down there. Orcs and Matt are sharing a room. Steph and Bernie, one of the other organizers, are sharing them. So we're all sort of like this little micro family in the basement of the monastery. And that could have been a disaster. That could have been an utter and complete disaster. And it's just sort of a beautiful thing. Like we were joking last night about how we could actually just stay here and live here. And, you know, and I'm sure your families would have to come and, you know, and take up residence as well. But yeah, it's just sort of there's an ease of our relationship that as friends and as organizers that I think is translating into what Reawaken is and how people are coming together in that same sort of spirit. So, you know, I think anytime something is born out of like natural connection and friendship and mutuality, that it has the potential to be transformative, whether it's for the person or for the environment. And so, yeah, I mean, there's an endless list of stories we can tell. So if anyone wants to jump in.
I have a funny one. So we're yesterday is our first full day, so we're all kind of nervous and setting up, and we realized like at 8:15 that there's a lot to do before 9 to get all, especially with the equipment to set it up and get things ready. And so we're busting our butt. And I'm like, yeah, okay, finally. And I go to the bathroom and I tell PJ that I'm going to the bathroom, so he may not want to listen to his mic.
And then for some reason, Oryx tells me every time he goes to the bathroom.
I go to the bathroom. I come back there like, we lost power. It's literally, the conference is starting 9 a.m. You plugged in
I plugged in a light and I saw a spark. And then, you know, everything, the whole front, the front of the book went dark.
Yeah.
So we just roll with it. You know?
And my funny story is that when I picked up Ben, I was expecting, because I didn't know Ben, I was expecting this kind of long dreadlock haired kind of young version of the dude from The Big Lebowski, you know, kind of hanging off the plane to film the thing. Quite the opposite.
I'm sorry to disappoint.
No disappointment.
With that being said, I want to go ahead and ask Ben what his first impression was on that car ride back from the airport with you in the car. What was that like? What was your first impression of Matt?
Matt, honestly, extremely friendly right off the bat. Quick with a joke. And the great thing was Matt made us, at least for me, feel very at home right away. Very friendly, very warm. And I didn't entirely know what I was getting myself into with all of this. And it's been great. Everybody's been extremely nice. And this isn't my first time in Australia, so I did kind of expect a great pass with meeting people from Australia. Everybody seems to be very friendly. And we've been having an excellent time.
How did you get involved?
I was involved with making Healing Voices with PJ and Oryx. I'm a motion graphics artist and animator. So I did all of our moving images on screen in our film. And PJ had brought up that.
And by the way, can I just interrupt for a second? He does work on some pretty major stuff in New York. And so we're really blessed to have him on our team. He's the man right there.
Yeah. So there was an opportunity to come here and be a part of this. And I've obviously been in the South Pacific before and didn't know when my next opportunity to come here would pop up. And this was just, it seemed like something I couldn't pass up, whatever it ended up being. And so I jumped on board, and it's been a great experience. But I live in New York City, and I spend pretty much all day avoiding eye contact with people. So this is an entirely different situation for me, and it's very. I woke up yesterday at 6 a.m. on my own volition, which probably happened 20 years. So there's something about this space that is very transformative, and I feel it's very serene. It gets me away from the craziness and the rat race I'm used to. So this has just been a great experience so far. I'm extremely glad I got to be a part of it. So,
and this guy, fresh from claiming his first Oscar in February. I mean,
okay.
That's true, isn't it? Oh, no.
Yeah, that's February.
Well, and Steve,
that's a goal.
One of the things we're doing, Steve, in you know, one of the hats that Ben and I are wearing this week is, you know, we're here shooting, and because we're gonna produce a documentary the experience of this week that tell that talks about the Humane Clinic and the work that Matt and Steph are doing, that tells a bit of the backstory of how this emerged out of Healing Voices, and that also sort of creates a document, let's say, of what Reawaken is in terms of something that's formatted and put together very differently than most conferences that people are accustomed to attending. So we think this is just pretty hip, and so documenting it is part of the journey. And so we'll have a pretty badass little short film to release at some point in the next couple of months that really reflects all these things that each of us are articulating here.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say that this started out as a dream, I think between the four of us, and with everything that we put together in terms of what we wanted this to be in terms of primarily connecting, and it's so beautiful to see it happening, and people like loving this experience, and one of the things that we hope will come out of this is we want to share this model. We don't want to say this is it, or we have to be the ones to organize something like this. That we want to see events happen around the world, whether that's locally, whether it's Reawaken USA, Reawaken North Carolina, Reawaken Melbourne. It could be one-day event, it could be the week-long events, but we found like we feel like we've really tapped into something here that could have a life.
I know Matt told me the story previously, but go ahead and tell me again, how did all of you guys connect to actually be a part of this together?
Go for it.
Yeah, you chip in. I mean, if we go back to the origin, we saw on social media that Healing Voices was going to be released for a global kind of, what do you call it?
A grassroots global release.
Yeah.
And this is back in early 2016.
April 2016, wasn't it? And, Steph and myself and a few others were doing slightly different things, but we were kind of dreaming of these sort of things. And we saw it and we put it on in a small church hall, expected maybe 30 to 60 people to turn up, and somewhere up to 150 turned up. And it was amazing, Steve. We had a feature film with not enough chairs, so people stood for an hour and a half to watch this film. You think about, you got to be pretty committed. You got to be pretty gripped by something to stand for an hour and a half watching it, because the moment boredom sets in, I'm out. But so then that night, I think there was a conversation between me and Steph about the festival. Was it you and me?
Which festival?
The
big one.
I don't know, but there was a conversation. Let's do this on a bigger scale. So we got a theatre with 500 seats. We got a young woman who is an actress who does a play around her voices. We had a guy I was working with who was previously labelled as having schizophrenia, who teaches dances. He choreographed and designed a whole new dance about the experience of mental distress, and that was on. We had an art show. And then we went to Womadelaide, which is an international music festival, and we were the only mental health stall, all based on the story of bringing conversation about what do we actually mean in our community when we say mental illness. What are we actually talking about? How do we change that conversation? Because it doesn't make any sense to most people. In reality, it makes sense to people who love the DSM, but that's a small minority. And so then we've been using the film maybe a dozen times in Adelaide. We've used it in Sydney. And the model of showing the film in community conversation, and me and Steph have done that in Northwest Australia, up in the Kimberleys, and then last year we were talking, and I think you guys said, how do we take the next step? And could it be that we come to Australia for something? And I think I remember this conversation where Matt kind of said, PJ and Oryx have kind of approached us to see if we want to do something with the next film, the Recovering Addiction. Is there some way we can kind of build on what we've been doing with healing addictions? And I'm just like, what?
Healing Voices.
Healing Voices, sorry. I remember just this moment of kind of going, what? Like, they obviously don't know who we are, Matt. We're just a couple of therapists. And then, so we sat down and we had this conversation on Skype with them, and we were just like, we are so in. And then, we just got off the phone, and we were at the time pretty naive, but also kind of just going, why are they approaching us? And Yeah, and I think they've really mentored us over this period of time. You know, we've met fortnightly for the last 9 months. At, you know, crazy hours of the days and nights trying to negotiate the time differences and things. And I think that why did you guys approach us?
Well, Oryx and I had been, you know, so we had a good run with Healing Voices, where we, you know, the initial global release, we were in 130 communities in eight countries around like a 2-week period when the movie first came out. So, and these are all screenings like the one that Matt described, where they were put on by local organizers, communities coming together to watch a film and then have oftentimes some difficult and challenging conversations. So to us, you know, we made a social action film, and that was the action. And so from that release, the movie proceeded to continue screening for well over a year, you know, here, there, and we did a sort of a similar thing with a home video release about a year later in the spring of 2017. And so the movie just has, you know, it's screened thousands of times by this point, and, you know, in countless venues and countless countries all over the world. And, you know, Oryx and I had been having conversations around like, what's next? You know, how do we sort of materialize this into like the next thing? And those are two things. For me, it became, you know, about making the next movie, right? It became about making the next related film as a way to sort of build upon the success of this, but also as a way to replicate that model of creating an independent production and releasing it to an audience that puts it to use the way that it's intended. But also, how do we keep Healing Voices relevant in ways that aren't just these community screenings? So we have been talking about doing a conference. We had talked about doing something in New York. We had talked about doing something in Boston, and this is, you know, this is a big undertaking. And you know, we were sort of enchanted with the narrative of what happened here in South Australia. It's like the best example of how the film took on a life of its own beyond what we could have envisioned. You know, so the way that Matt and Steph and
the whole community, Many Voices Collective and Humane Clinic really just ran with this thing was like, it was just a great example of what we hoped was possible. And so just, you know, and by that point we had really established a connection. And when Oryx was over here about a year ago, and so, you know, got to meet Matt and Stephanie in person and really sort of, you know, solidify that relationship in the flesh. And it just worked very organically, that, you know, that next step for us involved sort of like a context where Healing Voices was doing what it was intended to. And so, you know, that combination of sort of our intent and, you know, in a fertile earth like this really just made for what evolved into Reawaken. So, you know, going back 6 or 8 months, you know, we're talking like, what is this thing? What do we call this thing? What is our intention around this thing? And we wanted it to be in the spirit of Healing Voices and the spirit of the work you're doing here. It's not just your run-of-the-mill sort of conference, you know, where people are going wall to wall from keynote to workshop to lunch to keynote to workshop to so many choices,
and you know, and there for their CEUs or their CMEs, so they can check off some sort of professional, some box on a professional checklist in the seasonality of their work. So we just wanted to make sure that it had the spirit of what of the work that we're trying to do in the world. So.
And I want to say, you know, when I hear you talk like that, I feel a bit emotional because I think really what we created was we allowed ourselves to create what was happening between the four of us. And gone, you know, how do you trust someone on the other side of the world when you're investing financially in something? You don't really know each other. We've all been burnt in life in different ways. You know, we all come with our stories. And here we are, we come together. And, you know, we have, at this conference, we have home groups in the morning and the afternoon. And it's a distinct separation from traditional conferences in this back-to-back where the program's pretty empty, really. You know, there's a keynote, which is a short presentation followed by a workshop. We have 2 workshops, and then we have a home group. And you get into your group of 10 or 8 people, and you spend half an hour to reflect on what you've heard today, you know, this morning. Then you have a long lunch, you come back a keynote workshop, 2 workshops.
Tea breaks in between.
Tea breaks in between, really nice scones. And jam and cream, which is really important.
American scones are different.
Yeah,
anyway,
no, these are nice scones. These are more like you know, the motherland scones.
These are good scones.
And you know, and so we've kind of built on what's happened between the four of us, and then, you know, what it's done is, Ben arrives, and I feel like I've been online with Ben for the last 8 months, but I've only met Ben this week. And you kind of go, well, how do you, that's the environment we're trying to create. And yesterday, Oryx did his first keynote, the first presentation, and he invited people to come into connection and gave them an invitation. She talked about what we were doing, and it was this, just me and Oryx I was like, hey, well done, Oryx, that was brilliant, and he set this task, and we turn around, and there's just a room full of people who've not met each other before, just deeply connected.
Or walking around in the flower beds in the garden, walking around, talking.
So powerful.
People are crying.
Doing yoga, holding hands. Yeah.
Steph always says, as trainers, you want to get people crying. We have that.
Day one, first session, people crying. I'm a happy girl.
Success.
And the other thing, there's a couple of things that struck me. We're in here. We're the main organisers of a conference. It's morning of day 2. We're in the hour leading up to the conference starting.
He's the keynote today.
I'm the keynote in the next 20 minutes. We should all be pretty overwhelmed. And we've got this beautiful bunch of volunteers who've supported this journey. They're out there running the show. Yeah. And this is the first time I thought about it. And that speaks to relationship for me. And, in terms of money for this thing, me and Steph primarily underwrote the cost, but, none of us are getting paid well here. Broadly speaking, we've taken expenses. Ben's literally been given a plane ticket, and he's coming given a week to a bunch of people he doesn't know to be part of something and to support something. And I think it's a bit like your show, Steve. You do this because you believe, because you're passionate, because it's important. And I think that's an important message as well, Not to say we shouldn't be remunerated, but to say, look what happens when we really engage in our journeys. And sorry, that was all a bit impassioned, wasn't it?
Yeah, you're touching my heart.
That's the whole point, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It sounds like you're all really like coming together and truly living those core values that are stated in the logo: connection, compassion, and meaningful action. Everybody that's involved, from the organizers to the participants, are really displaying those core values together.
Right. And I'm a big believer in that. It really upsets me when there's leaders who are not walking the talk. They can talk good values, but then they're dismissive of people, or they're rude to people, or they're not doing it. And so it's really important that we do it. And I think we've done it the whole way through, and it hasn't always been easy. I know it's been easier for us because they've been on the ground, but all the hard spots have been talked about, worked through, and there may be more this week that happened. But
we had a moment, didn't we, about a month ago, and there was something came up, and it was this really awkward moment, or it could have been an awkward moment, but because we built this space of safety, we could just speak up. I suppose an example will be, Steve. You said to me when we spoke the first time, we should do this regularly, and I just flicked you an email 10 days ago and said, can we do live from the conference, And you're just like, let's do it, And that's the spirit, And I wish you were in here with us, because I feel like, wow, here's another guy who's really good. So just going to do it, just going to get on.
Anytime somebody leads an email off by, hey, this may be a crazy idea, but I sign up immediately. That's just how I roll, man.
That's how you.
Yeah, sign me up. I can't sign up fast enough. So what's next, man? I know you guys you're running out of time, right? You got to go in a couple minutes.
Yeah.
What's next? What's next for Reawaken?
Well, we want to talk about recovering addiction.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're in the midst of making the next documentary. We're producing a social action film about addiction, which is obviously a pretty big issue in the States as well as everywhere else. And so, in terms of our work, that's, we're shooting that film this year. We're going to have a global release in the spring. So, and we're able to, sort of workshop the film a little bit here tomorrow, which is cool, and just, sort of talk about some themes and see how they land with people. So that's exciting. And, we're definitely with both feet into the next thing on the production side of what we do. And in terms of Reawaken, we'll see. There's all sorts of possibilities that could come out of these relationships and this work and this model. I think.
Yeah, and I mean, just some of the practicals. We've been talking with some guys from New Zealand, so I'm pretty confident we'll be doing a 2020 Reawaken New Zealand in Auckland. We're going to be in Canberra in the Capital Territory of Australia in World Mental Health Month or week or whatever it is, doing a one-day Reawaken. So some of the plans that we take what we've learned here and we go to local communities. And, I'm really keen that we have speakers from local communities, so who are the people championing stuff there? We just bring a Reawaken banner and, the energy and then support people in their communities. I mean, for me and Steph, one of the big, big dreams, and I think this contributes to it, is that we will have a non-medicated, non-diagnostic community for people both in crisis and people wanting to spend longer time. And I know that sits with what you guys are doing in NC Raw, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
This community, and I want to acknowledge that because that's just creates that connection between you and us, right? We're striving for the same things.
Absolutely.
So those are some of the.
And for me, like yesterday we had this gorgeous workshop where we kind of, Matt and I did a workshop called Doing It Anyway. We wanted to call it Just Do It. We thought might get sued by Nike, so we didn't. But we kind of held this space about talking about how do we overcome the obstacles? How do we do the things that are part of our dreams and passions when it seems insurmountable? What resources do we have available to kind of overcome those things? And so what are we doing?
I don't want to interrupt you, Karen, but I'm just making a tick. Steve, I presume the Nike executives watch this show.
No.
Of course,
I
yes.
think the Reawaken for Nike is to really embrace the common humanity.
Right.
And there's their tick.
Yeah.
And then to sponsor
Sponsor
Reawaken events
Nike.
around the world.
Yes.
There you go.
Yes, and so at the end of this kind of talking about how we might do this, we got into groups and people talked about what their dreams are and what their obstacles, the things that are difficult and what resources they have to overcome those. And then we wrote up on the board, once everyone kind of discussed in groups and sort of shared and found ways to sort of support each other, we brought people together and we had this board absolutely full of things that people are going to do. And I was just blown away. I should not have been surprised at all, actually. Yeah. But I just felt like, people are either doing it. Some of the people talked about what they're already doing, which is incredible. Talked about the things that they're dreaming of that they're going to do and how they're going to kind of bring communities together to make that happen. And they just got it. And I feel like, we're quite blessed because the people here, they've been right for this, haven't they? They're just really already in the space.
And can I just say in the spirit of that, I just want to put out there Reawaken USA 2020. And we're kind of going into we're going into the nose. Oh, there's all these reasons why we shouldn't do something, but it could even be a day. It could be a Reawaken day. We could have a Reawaken day 2020 North Carolina. I think rural North Carolina would actually be a beautiful place to do it.
Come there, man.
Even if it's one day. But what we need is people on the ground to help us out because you had an amazing team. We need people who are interested in this. If you are, please contact us. We need organizers on the ground, but that's how these things happen. You have a dream first, and then you get the people, the resources together, and you make it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. If anybody heard those words and wants to research Reawaken further, how do they connect with you guys? Website, Instagram, Twitter? How do they find you?
Easiest is www.reawakenaustralia.com.au. You can click us an email through the website. Or we are Reawaken A on Twitter, and we're Facebook.com/Reawaken Australia. And we just love to hear.
And the Hearing Voices movie, where can our audience find that?
HealingVoicesMovie.com.
Perfect.
Or you can just Google Healing Voices; it'll come right up.
Healing Voices.
Pretty close.
Boom.
SEO, baby.
Well, thank you guys.
Into the next room here. So, Steve, we're going to keep you live, and you're going to stream Matt's keynote.
Perfect. Yep.
Can I just say one more thing, Steve? Two more things. One is thank you again to you. And I have an uncomfortable relationship with capitalism, but I do genuinely want to acknowledge Uniting Communities as our primary principal sponsor. They sponsored us with a lot of dollars, which was just it just meant it happened.
And it also meant that we could offer a lot of a lot
Free and cheap
of free and low cost places. We probably have, I don't know, close to 50% low cost places.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's made it accessible to people.
And there's a range of other sponsors as well, but Uniting Communities and Uniting SA came up with the underpinnings that meant we could do it. So just want to acknowledge that.
Beautiful.
All right, we'll see you in the room.
Absolutely.
I'm going to go and get my...
Looking forward to it. Good luck, Orcs.
Thanks, man.
Love you guys, man. Love you guys. Thank you.
This morning, Matt, Stephanie, PJ, and Oryx have already been online. They've been a part of a podcast from the States called NC Raw, or North Carolina Recovery Always. And if you haven't been on there, jump on there. And the topic for this week is Reawaken Australia. So it's Reawaken Australia in the US. And the great news is that we're now going to continue that on. And Matt's keynote is going to be a part of that same podcast. Yeah, absolutely. So we do have Twitter. By the way, I set up my Twitter account yesterday. I won't say that I did it during the keynote, but Twitter @ReawakenA or #Reawaken Australia. You post something on there. There's some great stuff there. It's because I posted 3 things yesterday, but there are also a number on there. So, or on the Facebook page. So, without further ado, thanks again to our sponsors, and especially our principal sponsor, Uniting Communities. I'm going to hand over to Matt to deliver his keynote.
I just want to start, as we did yesterday, and acknowledge that we're meeting on the land of the Kaurna people and pay respect to present, and respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people represented here today, and all First Nation people around the world. Much of what I'm going to talk about is very unnew, so it's been here a long time. I have the Bible, which will be one of my props today. I'm looking forward to quoting from the DSM. I can't believe this is happening in my life. I'm going to talk about the socioecotic. It is probably my favourite term, and I'm going to finish with introducing another new word to the lexicon, which is very exciting for me. I want to talk about the socioecotic, but I want to put it in the context where it came from, which is thinking about the non-psychosis that we share. So all the time we use the language of labels and creation of, somebody else's narrative over my experience. We are the one another. We become one thing and they become another. And so often we don't give people a chance or an opportunity to move away from that othering. And we've been talking about this. So seeing the non-psychosis we share is the kind of core of that. That in my view, I would probably extend to the point that I don't think psychosis exists really, other than a word that we've made up. And that's really not denying any suffering or distress or anything that anybody else wants, but it's just saying, well, how do we stay in what really is? And I think that's through seeing a shared non-psychosis. So I'm just going to start by setting the scene for where I am, and I'm thinking that the interconnected that occurs through the process of growth within a loving, non-goal orientated relationship leads to a negation of the need for an altered state to exist, to defend the threat of annihilation or non-existence. So when we genuinely come into interconnectedness, and that's based in a loving, non-goal orientated process between two people, then those extreme states don't need to be. This is an intentionally evocative speech with the hope that people will agree or disagree. I don't really mind. It's about finding what works for you. And in this, you can then see that the wounded becomes the healer, which is what Oryx was talking about yesterday. And that provides a bridge for the helper. And one of my biggest dreams and hopes, I suppose, is that one day we will look at people who have extreme states and be grateful, because we will actually understand more about ourselves and one another through the fact that some people have had to, or chosen to, or wanted to, or suffered with those extreme states. And then that really brings us into a space of meaning. That those of us like myself who've had these extreme distressing processes have gone beyond the suffering to find meaning in the actual experience. And in that, the helper then, in a non-psychotic state, can resist the attempt to change the legitimate reality of the person who's experiencing such a state. So that's the gift that we get, in my view, from the wounded person who themselves is actually potentially a healer. So in that context, then I want to just discuss, and we're going to do, it's not going to be around a talk, which is probably a good thing, we're doing exercise, but I want to think about the principles that I've kind of developed in my mind and invite you to think of what might work for you or might not work for you. But when we're working with trauma and psychosis, and throughout this talk, if trauma is not your thing, you don't need it to be about trauma. If just noticing that there's a space of disconnection in your life and that's enough, that it's created distress, discomfort, extreme state, whatever, that's a legitimate thing as well. And I think there's a real risk when we talk about trauma and psychosis that everybody has to experience what everybody else thinks is trauma. So it's just an additional label that we layer on. So if you haven't experienced trauma, how can you experience the psychosis that Matt's talking about? Well, that's not what I'm saying. So really, really allowing people to sit in what is theirs, their narrative, and noticing where that might create a process in our sort of perceptual reality that's different to somebody else's. So what are the principles? There's something about spirituality and culture, and I used to put this at the end, but then I've kind of been musing on this, and I think that if we start in a place of understanding spirituality and culture, whatever that is for a person, then inherently takes us to a place of how that person defines their reality, who they are, what they are, how they experience, how they connected to this wonderful ground that we stand on, the skies that we look at, or whatever. It's not about I'm a Christian, I'm a Buddhist, etc., etc. It's about the essence of us. So this is a distinct principle. I think if you're not going to embrace that, then perhaps don't work in these places. It's up to you, of course. I'm really keen on the work of Lauren Mosher, and the phrase "being with, not doing to" is an important phrase. But the story that I really love about the work of Lauren Mosher was when the person couldn't sleep in Soteria House, and so someone sat in the bed and held their hand. I mean, we don't need lorazepam when we can hold hands. It's an important principle. It feels beautiful. If you want to hold someone's hand now, if it's safe for you, it actually feels really nice. So you might want to try that, and it feels good. Joyce Travelby is a mental health nursing theorist, and I was telling Joe yesterday I was going to start speaking out about mental health nurses. I don't know if there's any in the room, but mental health nursing at its origin is very, very similar to peer work principles and values. If you look at the early theorists, you look at Gertrude Schwing in the 1940s and 50s, it was said that she prepared people for the psychiatrists to do their wonderful work. But actually, when you read about it, what she did, she sat with people who were said to be catatonic and not able to engage, and they engaged with them. Through her sitting there, through being with someone. And Joyce Travelby sat on and talked about the idea that if you're going to work with someone as a mental health nurse who's suffering and in distress, then the first 6 months are about finding a way that two human beings can just spend time together. Just be human together for 6 months. And we talk about rapport in the mental state examination as some sort of functional process. It's utter nonsense. And mental health nursing at its core has those values. So it's a really, as a mental health nurse, it's important for me to hold on to that when I see a lot of mental health nursing about being the opposite, which is disconnection, sticking needles in, doing tasks. If you're a mental health nurse, then you can let go of those things. Just read a bit of travel. Seeing the non-psychosis we share, and I'll talk again more about that, but it's about finding the coexisting same experience. Creativity and openness, if you're going to work in these spaces, is vital because it will remind you to connect to the other principles. Be available to what's happening. That's about moving me out of the way. It's what Oryx was saying about leaving my hat at the door. It's about coming into my heart, not in my head. I mean, we use our heads, that's okay, but what's it like if we sit in our hearts together? It's very beautiful, and it allows that creativity to come, and that sits in the empathy and compassion space. And then, what we've found at the Humane Clinic to be really useful is the tolerance of uncertainty, keeping that at the forefront of our mind. If you're going to work with someone who's in a state and you're accepting their state as different to something you're ever going to experience, then if you really want to be with them, because of the wider narratives of our society and community, you're going to have to tolerate uncertainty. And one of the things I see over and over in mental health services, particularly with people who are said to be psychotic, is that they became agitated or they became aggressive or they, so it turns out that standing up when you've got a lot of energy in your body might mean that you're being aggressive and more psychotic. But, I can model that for you. I got quite a lot of energy in my body. It's maybe not that threatening.
I unfortunately had the experience of a staff member who more makeup one day, but they'll probably manage.
Absolutely. Makeup and mania is intrinsically linked, absolutely. Unfortunately, but only in Victoria. But we've got Vimiac here, so they're going to rectify that. You can put that on your agenda for the election. Makeup does not mean. We'll take off the makeup, or if we want to be more adventurous, take off the makeup.
Exactly.
You know, my favourite thing on Barefoot Psychiatry, which is a Facebook page about bears eating feet and other unusual experiences for psychosis, for schizophrenia. My favourite one on there was we did a talk one day and someone was very excited to talk to us and challenge some of our ideas. And the challenge that he wanted to give us was that he saw someone come off of motragine, which is one of the disastrous drugs we often hand out. And he said, and when we took this woman off the motragine, she touched the psychotic membrane. Yeah. So this wasn't where this was not where this talk was going. That's okay. But seriously, I want to get back to seeing the non-psychosis. There's some principles alongside the kind of principles of practice. There's a kind of theoretical underpinning, shamelessly promoting my own theory and work. But right understanding, it comes from a Buddhist philosophy in my mind, and it's really important to me as a person who accepts some of the teachings. So right understanding, according to Longclaw Tomato, is a state of accepting the reality of what is, understanding without intention to change. So we don't need to change, we need to be with what is, without a goal and with the acceptance that the moment will, by the law of nature, pass. It will come and it will go. It may come again and it may go again. It may come again, it may go again. But if we can, our responsibility is to sit with that uncertainty, that difficulty. Because otherwise we start doing things to people, and there's your goal. Oryx and I were talking at the weekend about Stephanie and I have gone into private practice, and not one person, despite the vehement desire for planning and what's it called, care plans in public mental health and other services, it's an absolute passion for it. No one's ever asked me for a care plan outside of the system, ever. Now, I'm happy to plan with people, and no one's ever asked me. But if you go and sit in a public mental health service, it's a 3-monthly review of that plan. Beautiful.
And you get kicked out if you don't stick to your plan.
Well, if you don't stick to your plan, you're not really behaving the appropriate way, are you? You're not committed to recovery.
Okay.
Yes. So then we can start asking who are the goals for. It's a very important point. If I set a goal for someone, then that's my goal. It's the same as the label that I give. It's my label. So we really need to be mindful. If you want to do goals with people, how do we make sure that those goals are A, something that person wants to do, and B, goals that person has? And I think, over the last few years, it's been quite radical me saying this in a public mental health system. But, standing here right now, it doesn't feel very radical. So that's quite nice. And then the coexisting same experience is the kind of other part of the non-psychosis theory that I'm sort of playing with. And it's about, the coexisting same experience is about saying, I can sit in my reality that's different to your reality, but we can both consciously be aware of the difference. That's okay, and we can sit in it. And someone said to me yesterday, there's this chap we both know, and what do you, do you understand what he says to you? Do you understand? I know you understand the words, but do you know what he's trying to articulate? And where we got to is that the last time I met with this chap, I sat for 40 minutes without speaking, and he just talked. And his feedback was that I'm a good listener. So if I'd had a goal, then I'd have been needing to work out what it was he was saying. But what he wanted was me to be present in that moment. Now, I didn't share his experiences of some of the technological processes that the government do to him. That's not my reality. I feel quite free of that stuff. But I was able to tell him that. He was able to tell me about it, and we coexisted without the need to change one another's states, which just feels quite important to me. And in that's when we get to non-psychosis. Neither of us are psychotic. We're just having the experience. And it's not new, you all have heard it in different ways, but this is my way of thinking about it. So I'm going to come on to my explanatory framework, and then I'll wrap it up, so that's good. I'm not proposing a new label. It's really important, but one of the gifts, and I'm not asking people in extreme states to help others, but the byproduct of people inviting you to walk with them in their extreme state is as the helper and supporter, you do get to walk. you know, and we touched yesterday on the dangers of this and that, but I'm talking about in the moment, the person's giving me guidance. I'm not talking about me making something better or something right for somebody else. And that's an incredible gift in my life when I have that opportunity. So just hold in mind, I'm not asking you to take on yet another label of this miserable system, but I do want you to contemplate that my thing about labels is that when I tell you you have a disorder, it's my label that I've given. It's not your label to take on. You can choose. Now, that's not how our system works, but that's where I want us to system to get. You know, it's okay for a psychiatrist to tell me I have narcissistic personality disorder or schizophrenia or depression or psychotic depression or drug-induced depression. Those were 5 of them. You know, but they're the labels of somebody who's studied a lot about this book. This book in the introduction tells you it doesn't stand up legally. So you read a DSM, go and get a DSM. It says in there, in the forward, it doesn't stand up legally. So those labels belong to someone else. So moving on to the sociopatic, I just want to quote the wonderful Noelle Hunter. If you don't know of Noelle Hunter and trauma, psychosis and dissociation, it's just a beautifully written book. And the thing I love about Noelle Hunter's book on this is that having spoken with Noelle and read her other ones, she writes as she speaks, so it makes it accessible. You know, it's not some academic tone that you can't kind of connect to. You can feel like she's in the room in her lovely, drooling American accent, and you kind of read it with her in your head. It's a bit psychotic, but it works. So she says, I do not believe it is possible to separate psychosis and dissociation. To me, this is like attempting to separate a headache and a fever when I have the flu. Where does the headache begin and the fever end? And should I focus on treating my headache, fever, or maybe the virus that infected me and is creating an interconnected process of events in my body? While psychosis and dissociation are not the same thing, I believe that one does not have psychosis without dissociation or dissociation without psychosis. And here's the thing. Often, the difference simply boils down to who can frame things the way the professional wants to hear or agrees with. And for any of us that have touched the system here, we probably know what she's talking about. So my explanatory model, not a label, is called dissociotic. I have a hat with it on that my daughter wears. One of the things I want to propose, I used to think it was an individual thing, but actually it's a systemic thing as well. So you can very easily see when the system is in a systemic state of dissociotic. It can't quite stay in its consciousness of its responsibility and process. So it goes into this kind of awkward, bizarre language where people be put in double binds. So putting someone in a double bind would be a systemic form of dissociotic reality. And we wouldn't do it if we were consciously doing it and realised what we were doing. So we've lost primary awareness as a systemic approach when we create double binds for people. So if you're not sure what a double bind is, if you look at the mental state examination and we suggest whether people have insight or not, now we take an account of someone's life, and then as a wonderfully skilled professional, I look at things and I say, has this person got insight into whether they are connected to what I make of their reality? It's a double bind, because if they agree with me, then they're mad because I think they're mad. If they don't agree with me, they're more mad because they don't agree with me and I'm really clever. So, and at that point, the system is playing games. So dissociotic experience of animation and giving life, so it's an active process, and I'll explain why this is difficult to understand, to being at variance of companionship to ourselves. So we've separated ourselves off from ourselves in order for the survival of self in relation to interpersonal threat from the other. So we've got this incredibly skillful mind and soul and body that can separate itself off when the threat from another person is too much, and we can be separated away from that. But what we think of then normally is dissociation as this kind of flattening out, disappearing, not being present. But that's not the case. And my hypothesis is that psychosis is actually what Stephanie referred to when I was making up this word, was busy, active dissociation. This is the problem. So we think of dissociation as shutting down, freezing, not being present like that. But actually, we know now in dissociative states, people's frontal lobes are very able to do a multitude of tasks. So that what I'm suggesting is that psychosis is just an expression overtly of this. And it creates awkwardness for us because our perception is that people should be shutting down when actually becoming animated. The important part of this is that when we recognise this and we can shift our thinking away from, here's an ill person who's psychotic and overwhelmed, dangerous, scary, whatever, and we can say, this is a person who primarily has got an experience of being separated because in the here and now I feel threatened, then we can attune to what happened in that relationship, that environment, that space, and create an environment where people can come back into connection. It fits well with Reawaken. I love this. I just really love this. Everybody can see the faces. Everybody can see the bars. Faces, bars, faces, bars. If you think you can hold them together at the same time, really concentrate on it. It's not really possible. You'll just flick between them. So my theoretical concept is that the reason why we can't understand psychosis is a more of a dissociative experience is because you've just got a perception framework that it's an illness, and they're so similarly related.
I just wanted to add to that they've studied this in people that are going through psychosis. Those of us that are tricked by those perception tricks that you can do, they can see right through those tricks. Yeah. So there's,
And so the people are healers again, they're teachers. Yeah, thank you. This is my keynote, by the way.
I really love what you said, and it resonates, but I'm just curious, why haven't court systems got onto this?
Shall I go into that now? The insanity plea is about the diagnostic framework. If we had an insanity plea, we shouldn't call it an insanity plea, but if we had an insanity plea of understanding of the mechanism of threat response, it would have more legitimacy than the mechanism of disease.
Or maybe maybe I should clarify family courts.
Same principle. I'm at risk, so I look to the others that I behave this way, but because you haven't got a disorder, you're just behaving bad. If you had schizophrenia, you might forgive you. We can talk about it more this afternoon. It's a really valid point. Thank you for raising it. So I just want to tie it into a theory, so it's not just Matt Ball's formally psychotic theories. So where I'm suggesting here is that if you look at polyvagal theory, where we have social engagement as the primary mechanism of creating safety, and if that doesn't work, we go into mobilization and then into immobilization. What I'm suggesting in this theory is that the social engagement encounter in the so-called psychotic state, people just flick into this busy active dissociation project against the threat response. So it's the dissociative response in that space. We can extrapolate later. So what does it look like in reality? Once upon a time we were humans and animals. We did very primal things. There was an animal that's bigger than the human. The animal runs after its prey. I do this in an intentionally monotone voice. The animal runs after its prey. The person tries to fight it. It doesn't work. The person tries to run away. It doesn't work. The person lies flat. And because of the innate response to the animal, it runs past as it wants to chase and get down its prey. Hence we survive in that freeze sort of state. Then we grew a frontal lobe and it started working more effectively. And the threat changed. The threat is now from people, not animals. We try and fight people, and our society doesn't generally accept them and allow that. So we give that up. We try and run away. You know, just a fact for you, if you get detained in South Australia in a democratic society that we live in, we've now, under the new Mental Health Act provision, you can be treated under your detention criteria in another state. That's undemocratic.
And
you know.
we will also do this.
And we will reciprocate that to the undemocratic purveyors. So we try and run away. It doesn't work because of that. So if we lie flat, what happens? The animal would run past us, but it's no longer the animal. So humans have this desire and propensity to try and create betterness for somebody else. So if we lie flat, people come and do things to us. So what we've done is we've created this perceptual awareness that that's going to happen. And my hypothesis is that instead of lying flat, we now create these extreme realities and we express them. And for most people, if somebody is standing on the street shouting at voices that other people can't see, they go to the other side of the road and move around. What it does is, if we go back, it's the same thing as lying flat, but it's just an externalized version of that. And that's why we have problems with perception. What does it do? I mean, if we see what's happening between me and the other person, we can be attuning to what we've done that's been a threat to the other person, or what the environment's done. And that's a real key for me, because actually we can then bring that into the room with people and invite them to explore that with us, or us to explore that with them, so that we can consider whether we want to reverse what we've been doing that's created this need to separate off, or whether we want to tolerate it and see that we can tolerate it and be skillful and powerful in various different ways. So one of the principles here is that, I'll skip to here because I'm running out of time. So if we respond to psychosis as dissociation, and I'm not saying you have to believe it's dissociation, but the theoretical concept is more legitimate to think of it as dissociation in my view. So when we're in this moment and someone, and I'll read an example in a minute, and someone appears to suddenly become more psychotic, your responsibility as a supporter might be to see what's just happened. It might be nuanced, it might be moment-based, it might be more broad, it might be the sort of the language you've used, it might be you crossed your leg, and that for some reason was enough to trigger someone into a response of, oh, where's the relationship now? And then our job is to then not to go further towards them, but to allow someone to come towards us when they're ready. So what we do as human beings, somebody's suffering and we want to make it better. Now in the therapy room, that's a bit like moving slightly towards them, going closer. What I'm saying is stay where you are or even move back to where you were and invite them to tell you what it was like when I just did this. Oh, and when I do that, oh, that feels all right. Okay, so then it was me and it's not them. It's not them that's the problem. It's the relationship that's come and gone. We notice what the threat was, and if we go towards them rather than waiting for them to come to us, we're going to push people into liminality. And people in liminality become more creative, more ritualistic, and yes, more. So the further we go to try and correct what's happened in that moment, the more we're pushing people in that moment towards those extreme states, which we then decide we need to do something about. And so that's where the theory of non-psychosis comes in, that if we accept the legitimacy of the person's reality in this moment of interconnectedness, there was a threat or a vulnerability, what we're saying is that we acknowledge both of those positions, the two of us, if there's three of you are in the room, the three of us, and we say that we are now in a coexisting same experience. We can move gently with one another to see where the safety comes and where the safety goes. And that's a very beautiful space to be in. And for me personally, it was a very beautiful space to find myself in when I was so good psychotic. That actually, when people stopped paying attention to me being the problem and my expression being the problem, my problem didn't seem such a problem. And you know, I haven't got time, but I learned this living in a community of so-called psychotic people that weren't getting better from the wonderful treatments. And we didn't talk about psychosis, we didn't talk about risk, we spent time in community. And it was pretty simple. So I just want to read you through the sociocotic example. 30-year-old guy, Jack, has been hearing voices, a number of voices experiencing thought blocking, thought insertion as the language is, for around 7 years, and also quite a lot of paranoia and other unusual spiritual related experiences. The particular voice we were dialoguing with, and there was 3 of us in the room, we've been very pervasive and aggressive, and often was content-wise and nature-wise, just not very nice. I had my own ideas, he had his own ideas, the third therapist had her own ideas, you know, and we talked about it, worked that through as a shared formulative space. And Jack had invited us to engage with his voices. We were probably in the 15th session of talking with voices. And the session had been going on for a while. And what happened was, you know, there's intentional language here, was functioning well, whatever that means. So then I said to him, I asked him if he might ask a question of this particular voice. And it was a voice that represented distinct emotional distress in his life. And I asked him to talk direct to the voice, as had been the setup. And it was absolutely phenomenal. We've been engaged in 2-fro, 3-way dialogue. And suddenly he starts going, you know, and you could see the voice was getting louder. In psychiatric language, he was thought blocked. He wasn't able to process. And so then the second facilitator asked him the same question. And it just carried on. And then we noticed what was happening. We said, oh, would you like, you don't have to answer that. Is that difficult? And we could step back from there. And he steps back and he goes, oh yeah, thanks, yeah, I can't do that. You know, so what we'd seen then in psychiatric or psychosis perspective was an increase in psychotic phenomena in the moment. That's not how psychosis, schizophrenia works as a biological concept. But that's what we'd seen, an increase in psychotic phenomena, including increase in voices, thought blocking, cognitive impairment, and he was acutely psychotic on chronic schizophrenia. You know, that's what we might say. That's the sort of language if you've never had this pleasure of seeing this stuff. From a sociocotic framework, what we might think is that the request by the facilitator inviting Jack to take an action that was overtly challenging led to the difficulty in processing the dilemma that represents the previous and current emotional distress and conflict. the facilitator had, through his action of invoking an emotional conflict, created a threat within the human-to-human encounter. And that resulted in what we then call the psychotic phenomenon. As we stepped back from that, we came back into connection. This guy is not psychotic. So that's an example.
Can I just say that? When we came back into connection, meaning he completely started speaking to us and talking like
it was like in this moment, in that moment, in this moment. And so it's not what we talk about as a psychotic reality. So I'm just going to read you. I know I've gone over time, but I haven't explained this. It's out of place now. But with the labels, I just really want to mock something. Oh, I'm not allowed to move. Sorry. I just want to mock something. Schizoaffective disorder. Now, I'm not meaning to dismiss anybody's label that they want to own, right? But if you have schizoaffective disorder, it means that you have schizophrenia, but you have depression or elevated mood.
Might be wearing makeup.
Wearing makeup. But if you have schizophrenia, you might have extreme moods of some form. It's absolute claptrap. And I just wanted to kind of bring it up and make it overt. Recently, when I was having a discussion with a psychiatrist who said someone had a borderline personality disorder, and I said, oh, well, she doesn't have a borderline personality disorder. Oh, she has schizoaffective disorder. And I said to him, well, schizoaffective disorder is made up by you and your friends. And he stopped talking to me in a slightly dissociative state. And then when he came out of that state, he went to his friends where he feels safe and told them, Matt Borders said this schizoaffective disorder doesn't exist. So we saw this wonderful dissociative. So I want to give another example. This happened in a codependency unit in a hospital in Adelaide, and I've got Mick's permission to share this story, of course. It's going to be published soon. Mick was in an acute hospital as an involuntary consumer. Those of you that aren't from Australia who've detained. Having placed in a secure ward, a psychiatrist, he expressed the voices were telling him to kill people in the ward, including the psychiatrist and the nurses. Mick verbalising the content of the voices to the psychiatrist led to his detention. Prior to this, Mick had been openly discussing his voices with the nurse that would later be invited back in to spend time with Mick after he was detained. The conversation had included the same content, but had not raised alarm for the nurse to consider detaining Mick, due to the nurse taking an acceptance and meaning-based approach to understanding the voice. During the conversation, the psychiatrist, he was also making various threats, so I would say articulating his fears in the direction of other individuals who were residing in the ward. He thought other people were going on. A nurse with an interest in spending time with psychosis as a way of allowing it to appear or not appear, as is the functional need of the individual, was invited to speak with Mick. As the process of the therapeutic encounter unfolded, Mick began to describe the phenomenon. As Mick articulated the range of voices, visions and auras he was experiencing, he referred to the voice directing him to kill the nurse that was relating him. Mick was sitting in a relaxed posture on a comfortable chair and was facing directly to the nurse. The nurse was not experiencing any sense of threat, but instead was interested to understand more about the experience. The nurse articulated his sense of feeling safe, despite the voices giving direction to Mick. Two significant considerations were made by the nurse and explicitly explored by Mick. One, do you want to kill me? Do you personally want to kill me? He said no. What does it feel like to hear a voice saying that you should want to kill someone when you don't want to hurt that person? And in this context, it was particularly important because we knew each other for 6 months. Mick was clear in stating that he did not wish to hurt or intend to hurt, kill the nurse, despite hearing a voice expressing this view. He immediately became distressed and upset at the sadness that the nurse might think Mick would want to harm him. He began to weep. He expressed that he felt guilt and shame in hearing voices instructing him to hurt someone he cared about. He was demonstrating safety towards him. It was a really, really powerful moment in the high dependency unit. The next thing that happened was I said to Mick, what do you want to happen now? And he said, could I have a hug? So we stood up and we hugged. And he cried and he cried and he cried. And we stood there while he cried on me as an unpsychotic person who'd just been detained for so-called psychosis. Gosh. Anyway, about 6 months later, Mick would say to me, you know that moment when we hugged and we cried? There was nothing happening. There was no voices. And this is what I'm talking about. When we come into connection, we create safety, and we invite the other person to tell us what that feels like and how that needs to happen. As Oryx was telling us yesterday, in these extreme states might just not need to exist. Because we're talking about addiction and trauma, and I'll wrap it up, I want to introduce a new word, dissociaddiction. It's the first time. It's a brand of Reawaken. So I made this up this week after discussing it with PJ. But in all seriousness, it's a hypothesis. It's a way of describing and creating an explanation. But Andrew Chitarsky talks about the urge, the access of change. And I suppose I really value that in addiction. So there's this kind of space for change to occur in that kind of surging, urging thing. But I suppose what I want to say is that I agree with that, but only if we understand what might be happening. And I wonder if we apply the same logic, anyone who's ever used drugs in a ritualistic way or spent time with someone that has, there's quite an incredible ritualistic process of engaging with that experience. You know, whether it's scoring, whether it's preparing, whether it's gathering to get that process underway. It's quite wonderful in terms of the energy that the person has in it, and lots of skill. And so I suppose my hypothesis in the dissociaddiction space is that this is going to occur when we lose connection, whatever it is we feel safe about. Often I'm thinking a person, but if it's not, it's the environment. We're going to move into a dissociative, another new word, dissociaddictive space, where we lose primary consciousness over, I'm going to find safety over here. And we move into that functional dissociation, where we've still got access to the frontal lobes to process, but we lose connection and consciousness with others in our environment around us. And I think what I really like about this in my head is that what does a person need in that moment? And we don't necessarily know, but if we use the compassion focused therapy approach and we think about the threat and the drive being changed, so when the threat increases, the unsafety increases, the drive reduces towards safety, maybe. What do we need to bring the drive back into connection with? We need soothing. And having worked in heroin communities, there is an explicit and overt mirror that when we induce opiates into our system, people feel safe again. And in the compassion-focused model, what do we do when we soothe ourselves? We increase the endogenous opiates and oxytocin to bring back the drive and reduce the threat. And so this is where I think that we need to much more clearly understand the drives in those processes and think about how we can support the person to soothe by coming back into connection, instead of seeing their behaviours as in some way disruptive or dysfunctional. So just to summarise, I've gone way over, as everyone has, so I don't do that. The disconnection, just to summarise, the psychotic person may be in a state of feeling unsafe due to the action or being in relation to another person, as the individual cannot change the fact of another person existing. They change their own state and consciousness. The energy of this state sets a state of complete annihilation and existence of their existence and soul. It does leave them in a liminal space in the world. At this point, psychosis can become exacerbated, or the dissociative state, as the individual navigates the liminal space of existence and non-existence. So now we're talking deeply about everything that we are. We're back to spirit and culture. The connection, well, with the acceptance that the non-psychotic experience becomes a river through which transition might flow to deeper interconnectedness. So if we can see the process not as something aberrant and different, that's the bridge where we maintain and build on our interconnectedness. I'm going to do an exercise with you and I'll explain it shortly. Thank you.